Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 10. This is our first mini lesson on this chapter covering the muscular system. So as we do with all the beginnings of body systems, I'm going to go over the functions of the skeletal system. And then this mini lesson is going to focus on the organization of muscle tissue. So going into how muscles are organized from the whole organ level all the way down to the cellular and molecular level. So first of all, functions. So again, following the notes, these are listed right here at the beginning of the note outline, or you can fill them in. So obviously the first function of the muscular system is to produce skeletal movement. So the muscular system is composed of the skeletal muscles and the associated tendons. Smooth muscle and cardiac muscle, while we will be discussing those at the end of this chapter, they technically are not part of the muscular system. It's solely just the skeletal muscles. So that major function is to produce skeletal movement. They're hooked to our bones. They pull on our bones move, our body moves. They also help to maintain posture. So your skeletal muscles are contracting even if your bones are not moving, like, standing upright. You're still, you're not moving around, but your muscles are still contracted to keep you upright against the forces of gravity wanting to pull you down. They help to support soft tissue. So think of your abdomen, right? So we have our skull to protect our brain. We have our rib cage to protect our heart and lungs. We don't really have any bony protection of our abdominal pelvic cavity, but what we do have is multiple layers of skeletal muscles. They help to support to some protection. They guard entrances and exits. Think of your orifices. So your sphincter muscles, your mouth and your anus are skeletal muscle. Maintain body temperature. So they play a role in thermoregulation with shivering, right? So muscle contractions, when you're cold, your muscles contract. They burn ATP, they produce heat as a byproduct. So they help to warm your body and bring your temperature up. We'll see that in another mini lesson on ATP usage of muscles. And then lastly, skeletal muscles store nutrient reserves. The main nutrient that we're going to be seeing with muscles is glycogen. Glycogen is a large polysaccharide, a whole bunch of glucose molecules hooked together. So where we saw bones store calcium and lipids in the yellow marrow, we are going to see skeletal muscles store glycogen, glucose, basically the fuel that the muscles need to do their jobs. Okay, so on to the organization. All right, so when we look at skeletal muscles, they have a very close association with different types of connective tissues. So I know this says organization of connective tissues of a muscle. So there's lots of circles and long cylindrical features in skeletal muscle. So when we take a look at the whole muscle, right? So it could be your whole bicep, your whole tricep, what in your flexors or extenders, that individual organ, skeletal muscles are organs, is going to be wrapped in a connective tissue sheath called epimysium. Epi meaning outer, and mysium is a root that has referring to muscle. So we have the epimysium around the entire muscle. Okay, and then within that, muscle cells are organized into these smaller cylindrical structures called fascicles. Okay, and fascicles, so here's a fascicle right here. Right, there's the name, fascicle. A fascicle is surrounded by its own connective tissue sheath called the perimysium. So here we can kind of see it in both of those pictures. So the perimysium is a connective tissue sheath that surrounds each fascicle. So when you have a whole bunch of fascicles hooked together, surrounded by the epimysium, that's going to be your muscle. And then each fascicle is made up of a bundle of individual muscle cells, which we call muscle fibers because they're long and skinny. And each individual muscle fiber is surrounded by its own connective tissue sheath called the endomysium. Okay? So we'll see some endomysium in the fascicle organization as well. And then within each muscle fiber, we can find these little guys called myofibrils. It's like I just crossed it off. Myofibril. So we have the whole muscle surrounded by epimysium, made up of multiple fascicles, with each fascicle surrounded by a perimysium. Each fascicle is made up of individual cells. Individual cells are surrounded by an endomysium. And within each cell, you have the connective or the contractile organelle called the myofibril. You'll also be able to see things like the nucleus and the mitochondria at the cellular level. So that's kind of letting you know where you are at when you're looking at these different cross-sectional views of a whole muscle, a muscle fascicle, or the muscle fiber. Okay, and then these mysiums, the epimysium, the paramysium, and the endomysium at the ends of the muscle, they all combine together to create the tendon. Okay, so when we're talking about dense regular connective tissue that makes tendons, it is the continuation of these mysiums past where the muscle ends. So they're no longer covering muscle cells or fascicles of the muscle. They become the tendon, which will then hook onto the periosteum or connective tissue of a softer tissue and connect that tendon to the bone or to say some skin like a facial muscle. Okay. We do have blood supply. Our muscles are very vascular. They have to be because they're constantly burning ATP. So we have to have a good supply of oxygen and a good way to get rid of carbon dioxide. So you can see some blood vessels and nerves are the yellow bits. Oh, there we go, nerves. So we see large blood vessels and nerve bundles in the whole muscle organization. It didn't really show too well here on the fascicle, but you can imagine the blood vessels would be like kind of at that level next to the muscle fascicle. And then here we can see capillaries. We're at the capillary level here in the muscle fiber, and they don't show it, but this would also be the location of our nerve ending. So those large nerve branches and large arteries found in the whole muscle just break down and get smaller and smaller and smaller until they reach the cellular level to innervate the cell and bring blood to the cell. Okay, so now we're going to take a closer look inside of the cell, or sorry, not inside of the cell, that's going to be the next video. This last slide in the organization is just how does a muscle fiber form? If you remember when you're learning about skeletal muscle tissue back in histology, one of its key characteristics was it is multinucleate, right? So cardiac muscle and smooth muscle were single nucleus. Skeletal muscle had hundreds of nuclei per cell. So how does it happen? Because most cells usually just have one nucleus. Well, it happens in fetal development. So we have these stem cells called myoblasts. So a whole collection of myoblasts. One of them kind of stays off to the side and will eventually become what we call a myosatellite cell. But all the rest of these individual myoblasts will fuse together, nuclei and all, to create one long muscle fiber. So this will eventually grow and connect with its mysiums to the tendons of the bone and wherever the muscle is hooking to. And what you end up with is an entire muscle with multiple nuclei. And so you could imagine every single one of those nuclei is going to represent a fetal stem cell, a myoblast that was fused to create this individual muscle fiber. So if you have a muscle cell that's got 100 nuclei, it's a good bet that that cell was formed by the fusion of about 100 different myoblasts. Okay. All right, so that finishes up just our introduction of skeletal muscle organization. Make sure you're comfortable knowing all the mysiums, epi, peri, endo, kind of what types of features you can see at each of those levels. And our next video will cover the details of the cell anatomy, muscle fiber cell anatomy. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye.